Number one, a lack of initiative on the part of departments and institutions to engage meaningfully in anti-racism work. I first noticed this last summer when several classics departments released statements affirming that Black Lives Matter and condemning the white supremacist foundations of the discipline. I'm usually quick to agree that statements of solidarity aren't enough on their own. In one article, Johnson argues that solidarity isn't about changing hearts and minds, as some racial equity practitioners would have you believe. Honestly, I could care less about changing hearts and minds. I'm about systems change. This sentiment was also echoed in yesterday's anti-racism daily newsletter on divesting from whiteness, in which 8 white identities, written by an associate professor of African American Studies at Northwestern University in Illinois, was discussed. In the final lines of the newsletter, it was stated that according to the graphic, the ultimate goal is to be a white abolitionist, a white person who is invested in changing institutions, dismantling whiteness, and not allowing whiteness to reassert itself. Abolition of whiteness and all of its intricate systems are the only way forward to freedom for all people. But whether you find statements of solidarity useful contributions to anti-racism or not, actively deciding not to affirm the lives of Black people and most recently people of Asian descent, especially when they're in your own classrooms and departments, is a statement in itself, especially when the department is otherwise vocal in support of other marginalized groups like sexual abuse victims and international students. This is not to say that Black people deserve more recognition than these groups, nor is their plight more important. But I think that such a stance, and yes, you're complicit even if you claim to be neutral, is one that echoes in our classrooms and legitimizes the problematic methods that many instructors choose to employ. Anyway, I've spent a lot of time over the last few months trying to wrap my head around the active resistance to anti-racism work that seems to pervade our discipline in particular. Just last week, I raised this concern on Twitter, challenging the most common excuses that people seem to use when they say they don't want to do the work. A lack of time, not knowing where to start, or thinking they've already done enough, among other things. At the department level, I get the feeling that we just don't like offering training, whether it deals specifically with anti-racism, pedagogy, or just how to be a decent human being in general, or more broadly. Maybe it's because we don't like the extra work that's involved, the work of organizing or the work of just showing up. Or maybe we think that by not addressing interpersonal issues, including ones that arise in our classrooms, we're maintaining an environment in which all viewpoints are valid. I don't know why we don't offer more training, but I do know that the lack of movement towards anti-racism training until something problematic is reported, rather than offering such training regularly and systematically, not only causes harm, but perpetuates and nurtures it. Number 2, a lack of individual initiative and accountability. With no systematic pedagogical or anti-racism training in place, it should be unsurprising that few instructors have taken it upon themselves to engage in critical self-reflection and revision of their pedagogical approaches. In my experience as an instructional aide for my department last summer, I saw just how few instructors tend to think critically about not only what they're teaching, but how they're teaching it. Rather than changing with the times, whether that be in response to a surge in racist events in the world or in light of a global pandemic, they prefer to stick to what they know because that's how it's always been done, because no one's ever complained, as we just heard in Nicolette and Jonah's talk, or simply because they feel there are other things more worthy of their time and energy. As I mentioned before, I myself have also been complicit in thinking this way. I followed what those who came before me had done because I didn't know what other approaches existed. I didn't seek out new ways of teaching. Like the department, I expected my students to alert me when something wasn't working. The reality is that reflecting on one's teaching should be more central than it currently is. Just because no one's ever complained doesn't mean that your methods aren't problematic or causing harm. And the way it's always been done is almost certainly outdated, laden with racist language and images, and in need of revision. In the last year, there have been lots of events and articles like the one in the New York Times dedicated to getting us to confront our complicity in a discipline founded on white supremacy and steps to take if we want to contribute to making the discipline more inclusive. I participated in one such event, an AIA webinar series in August, that provided concrete examples of how to decolonize our syllabi. However, we can organize talks, workshops, and conferences like this one, but these all mean nothing if people aren't really engaging with them, both while they're in them and after they're over. As organizers of these events, we can only do so much. As the saying goes, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. But sometimes the challenge lies in getting them to the water in the first place. So how do we get these people to the water then? How do we get them to see that anti-racism work is important and to actually do that work? A simple solution might be to draw up a checklist, a firm list of steps to get them from point A, consciously or unconsciously racist, to point B, acknowledging how they've been complicit in racism and actively dismantling racism wherever and whenever it occurs. But no such checklist exists, and for good reason. To be sure, anti-racism work is a many-headed hydra. There are many things that you could be doing, but no one is expecting you to do them all at once. A post-racial world is a myth. There will never be a world in which racism no longer exists. So our anti-racism work must be ongoing. There is no checklist because a checklist implies that once you complete the list, your work is done. Our work is never done, and this might be a primary reason why so many people actively resist getting started. Like the many-headed hydra, if you cut off one head, two more grow back in its place. Despite the fact that no checklist exists, I do believe that providing people like this with actionable starting points with first anti-racism work is important and incentivizing. Here I offer just 3 points of departure ranging from individual, group, and department level action. First, actively make time for anti-racism work and acknowledge that critical reflection on your teaching is part of that work. It's easy to make excuses for why you can't do the work. I get it. The Zoom fatigue is so real, and so are our increasingly overwhelming workloads. Even before the pandemic, it felt impossible to read or do anything that we didn't perceive as directly related to our work. But guess what? This is related to your work, and no one else can do it for you. Treat it like work because it is work, whether you're being paid to do it or not. Schedule time for it in your calendar and give your full attention to it when you engage with work, ideas, and theoretical frameworks with which you were previously unfamiliar. But more than this, think seriously about how what you are learning can be mobilized in your life and in your classroom. Second, reflect on your pedagogy and your complicity in perpetuating racism, both individually and with others. So you've acknowledged your own racist behavior and resolved to change or diversify your syllabus. Now what? I see now why it's been so easy to simply recycle an old syllabus, wholesale or particular elements, for a new iteration of a course. I recently learned just how time-consuming designing a well-thought-out syllabus can be, so I know that the idea of tearing apart one that's been working for you for years can seem like a daunting task. But it doesn't have to be, nor does it have to be one that you have to do all on your own. One solution would be to form communities based on workshopping syllabi, or focused on workshopping syllabi. Here, instructors would both consider potential approaches for future courses and also be able to bring a syllabus, activity, or approach they used in the past to get feedback on it from their colleagues.